let's move on to talk about the government's woes. I mean, perhaps the clearest sign of this, of Labour's difficulties, is the fact that we first had the first YouGov poll with reform coming on top. Paul, do you think, I mean, this is a sign of that Keir Starmer is, all is not well in Keir Starmer's camp?
Yeah, I mean, Labour has certainly sunk in terms of its popularity since the election in a way that I don't think anyone anticipated. I mean, there was talk they were going to get the difficult decisions out of the way early, and they tried to do that with the budget and so on. But I don't think anyone truly foresaw the level to which they've sunk in the polls, nor the level to which reform has risen so quickly. And I tweeted this morning, actually, I genuinely think we could be seeing the end of the Conservative Party as a serious political force in this country. I don't think I've ever said that before, and I know things fluctuate, but there does seem to be something going on. There does seem to be quite a serious realignment going on. And I think the fact that reform are winning so many working class votes as well,
Yeah.
The C2DEs, the occupational working class and so on, I think is very interesting. Reform came second in 98 constituencies in the general election in July. 89 of those were Labour constituencies, and 60 of those were in the north of England. Lots of them traditional red wall, what you might call post-industrial Britain, and so on. And therefore, Labour, I think, has got a real problem. And I grew up in the London borough of Barking and Dagenham, traditional Labour territory. And in 2006, I was living there when the BNP came out of nowhere and won 12 seats on the council, their best ever result in local government. I was active politically at the time. And so I've got an idea as someone involved with the Labour movement. I know why traditional Labour voters end up voting for right-wing parties. It's because if their own party, who they see as their own party, the Labour Party, doesn't deliver for them in terms of economic security on the one hand, and, if you like, cultural security on the other hand, then they become very disorientated, they become very bewildered, and they are inclined to throw in their lot with, if you like, populist parties who come along and say, we get you in a way that those establishment politicians don't. And the Labour Party, I don't think, has understood that for the last 25 years, particularly since the turn of the century, since we've seen the impact of what you might call the new global market, globalisation, the effects of that taking hold in working class communities, mass deindustrialisation in these places, people feeling that they've been abandoned, at the same time, very rapid and far-reaching demographic change. And by and large, these are people who are broadly tolerant. They're not opposed to immigration. They know the world changes, but they just feel that establishment politicians, including the Labour Party, have just completely forgotten about them. And I detect even now, despite what Keir Starmer has said over recent years about reconnecting with the Red Wall, I detect that they still don't trust the Labour Party on some of those fundamental issues. So there's something happening, I think.
Definitely. And it seems as if there's a lot of areas where you could say the Labour Party is just completely out of touch with the public. I mean, you think about some of the net zero policies that are leading to outright deindustrialisation. I mean, one issue, maybe a small issue in the grand scheme of things, but the Chagos Islands question has flared up again. Many people might not be at the top of their list of things to care about, but many people are baffled as to why the government seemingly has an endless money pit to give to a foreign country, and in order so that they will take away our territory. I mean, people are scratching their heads about over that. The only explanation seems to be that Labour is wedded to rule by lawyers. It fetishises international law over and above pretty much everything else, over and above connecting with voters, over and above the national interest. What do you make of that, Ella?
I don't think the Labour Party is out of touch with your average working man and woman. I think they don't want to be in touch with them. I don't think it's a mistake. And the Chagos Islands is a really good example of that, because this all hinges, this sort of, people are describing it as insane, this sort of mad plan that pleases no one, not least the Chagosians, who have been completely ignored, not consulted by the government, boxed out, and supposed to be happy with now being under the rule of Mauritius. No one is pleased by this, and the whole thinking behind it is a vanity project by Keir Starmer, who is obsessed with being liked on the international stage. It's all based on a ruling from the International Court of Justice, opinion, sorry, not a ruling.
Yeah,
so,
non-binding opinion.
You know, and the argument is, oh, we can't be serious players on the global stage if we ignore the ICJ. And, you know, I mean, it comes back to that thing that we love quoting on Spiked of, you know, Keir Starmer saying that he prefers Davos to Westminster.
Yeah.
Because it's just so telling. It's just, this is what this guy likes. He likes the applause in the conference centres, in the lovely air-conditioned rooms. He likes being, you know, on top of all with his lawyers and being Mr. Liberal. And, you know, it plays into the whole kind of, you know, decolonisation, fashionable kind of look, or we're such a right-on party. But I mean, it's decolonisation with no plus sides for the colonised.
Yeah.
Again, the Chagosians really don't like this. In fact, there's a group of them who are trying to bring a court case to halt this deal completely. But, you know, whether it's the cost of it or the sort of the narrative that it tells of Labour Party being this sort of, you know, extremely elitist, I think, organisation full of people who don't care about what happens in the average day of the average voter, is why people aren't interested in them. And, you know, I don't see any road forward with its current attitude of ever being in touch with people. Why would you ever trust what the Labour Party is doing if you look at things like, you know, Kim Ledbetter trying to open up, or rather trying to close down discussion about the assisted dying bill, possibly the most morally contentious thing that a government could ever lay its hands on, and, you know, could change the lives of individual people, or you know, everyone if you have a dying relative. You know, the way in which she's going about that is by trying to make discussions of it in Parliament behind closed doors. So no public scrutiny in what's supposed to be a free and open democratic country. You know, even the recent sort of slightly nonsense story about the whole voice coach thing in lockdown, and you know, who cares about that? But again, the whole way in which it was handled, and Keir Starmer getting very ruffled about the fact that someone dares to question his, you know, conduct during lockdown. It's just none of it to me tells a story of a government that wants to hear from its people, the people, the citizens who put it in power. And so I kind of don't care. I don't care that they're not in touch. I don't think they want to be in touch. I'm kind of interested in reform in the sense that it's a party that has gone from having sort of almost no base. It's almost like was a stage party, you know, Farage with the big flares and all the kind of, you know, the big parties that they had, and it was all quite showy, to now sort of almost in reverse becoming kind of grassroots in a way that's sort of interesting. And, you know, it needs to get more serious about its you know, functioning as a party and an organisation. But in terms of providing a bit of space for a different conversation in Parliament, I mean, even the sort of handful of MPs they have ask more questions, I think, like, than anyone else combined. They're like, you know, dedicated to their job as politicians. Something to be said for that.
I think that people have been complaining that on the Labour bench they ask too many questions. Which you think it's their job to do that. Paul, I did want to ask you about the sort of voice coach gate, if you can even call it that. This, of course, relates to the voice coach visiting Keir Starmer on Christmas Eve 2020, when we would have been in a kind of lockdown. London was in, to use the jargon back then, tier 4 lockdown. Again, I often think that really the rules were the problem, not the rule breakers. But certainly Starmer, you know, used a lot of tried to hang Boris Johnson for being a rule breaker. He was a big advocate of lockdown, presented himself as whiter than white on these issues, quite similar to almost Lord Ali Gates as well. You know, it's the Tories who are corrupt. Button wouldn't melt in my mouth, but suddenly there's a scandal attached to Starmer. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think on one level, it is just so tedious, the fact that we, you know, as a nation, we're debating the question of whether or not a voice coach happened to visit the Prime Minister on a particular day. But it shows the absurdity of lockdown, that it has forced these sorts of debates, even now, a long time after lockdown. It's still on the agenda. But the truth is, if you live by the sword, you've got to die by the sword.
Yeah.
And Starmer and co. made merry hell out of the fact that Johnson and Sunak broke the rules. So you can't then complain if the spotlight is turned on you. I mean, I always felt that with these rules, if we were going to have the rules, it was natural that from time to time, even people in positions of authority were going to slip up, because it's all very new. And people didn't always know exactly what the restrictions were, and people were trying to live their lives and so on. And if we were going to have the rules, we should have treated it sensibly, like someone, if they breached the rules by meeting someone unintentionally, they breached the rules by meeting someone when they shouldn't have done. It should almost have been treated like, you got done speeding at 36 miles an hour in a 30 miles an hour zone. That would have been the sensible approach. But politicians were looking to kick lumps out of each other and looking to make political capital out of each other. So you saw this accusatory atmosphere where politicians were almost looking for other politicians to slip up and to say, it's disgraceful, you slipped up, you're killing our granny, and stuff like that. And Starmer, unfortunately, was part of that accusatory mood. So I don't really have much sympathy for him, that the spotlight has been turned on him. But I still think the bigger question on lockdown is the fact that we are still, and I think for many years to come, we'll be paying a very heavy bill for it that I think few people predicted at the time. I think, as a society, we treated it like the Black Death, when in fact it was a very nasty disease. There's no question about that. Very nasty virus that was potentially fatal for a small number of people, relatively speaking. And absolutely right, in a civilized society, you should try to shield those people as much as possible. But I still can't get out of my head the fact that we quarantined effectively the whole country for a virus that actually was only a serious threat to a small number of people. And when you look at what Sweden did, where they took a much softer approach, and I think that the data proves that actually for that, they weren't in the long term as a society any worse off, and probably have come out of it better than us.
Yeah.
Those are the big questions, and we shouldn't lose sight of those questions in all of the minutiae around Starmer and his voice coach.
Definitely.
You've got to laugh though. Starmer made himself Mr. Perfect. He advertised himself as Mr. Perfect.
Mr. Rules.
And Tories were bad enough, but I mean, passes for glasses, getting basically the entirety of Sue Gray's family some kind of position in government somewhere. The list goes on and on. I mean, this government is shady, and possibly in ways that are more politically significant than the previous one. And that's, as Paul says, the voice coach thing, lockdowns, there hasn't been much about it in the press, which is an interesting thing. And maybe it's just because COVID doesn't sell papers anymore. Maybe it's because the commentariat don't like criticising Mr. Perfect. But that aside, I think the bigger issue is that this is a government that has sold itself on being to the letter on the rules, and has from day one gone about being the most kind of in sordid ways rule breaking than possibly the previous one.